Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we continue our retrospective on Godzilla with the 1984 movie, The Return of Godzilla, which came out here in the United States in a slightly altered form as Godzilla 1985. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, editor of this summer's Castle of Horror anthology. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. And also in Austin, writer of the long-running underground comic series Halloween Man and winner of the 2018 Best of Austin Award from the Austin Chronicle, Mr. Drew Edwards. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello. All of the sea
I
losses.
was trying to have the intensity of Raymond Burr right there.
So you were like standing against the wall, like 12 feet away from us, and then going,
Yes.
hello. and finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman, Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello, Julia.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, we've been out for a week. We've been traveling the world. We are back. The Return of Godzilla, released in Japan as Godzilla, also known as Godzilla 1984, is a Japanese kaiju film directed by Koji Hashimoto with special effects by Teruyoshi Nakano. The film features the fictional monster character Godzilla. It's so fun to describe Godzilla as though none of us have heard of it. Produced and distributed by Toho, it is the 16th film in the franchise. It is the first in the Heisei period, which is called that merely because it's named after a political period in Japan's history, in the same way that I might say Reagan era, like Reagan era Fantastic Four. Okay, despite having been produced during the Showa period, don't know what that means. In Japan, the film was followed by Godzilla versus Biollante, which means it's going to be 5 years before there's a sequel. All right. The Return of Godzilla serves as both a sequel to the 1954 film and a reboot of the franchise that ignores all of the other sequels. It has darker tones and themes similar to the original film, returns Godzilla to its, quote, destructive antagonistic roots. The film was released theatrically in Japan in December of 1984, and the following year in the US as Godzilla 85, heavily re-edited with Raymond Burr reprising his role from the 1956 film version, Godzilla King of the Monsters. That was a lot. We will go into explaining all of it. I know we have some big Godzilla fans here, and we've all been really enjoying this series. So let's go Drew, Julia, Tony, and then I'll go. Drew, how excited are you to talk about this movie? I want to know about Godzilla 85.
I am really excited to talk about this movie. This is my personal favorite Godzilla film. It is the first Godzilla film I saw. I saw it in the Graham Drive-In when I was a kid. I still have an action figure from that time period, a Godzilla 1985 action figure. I have the version of Godzilla that I now have tattooed on me is very specifically this version of Godzilla, the really sort of super pissed off looking Godzilla that's in this movie.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the better sequels. There's a lot of people that'll make an argument that it is the best sequel. I do think that it is possibly the closest to the original, although they were able to work in some of the fun of some of the later sequels into it. I think it's got some really good performances. I even like aspects of the American cut, of which I will go into now that I've like marathon watched both of them back to back. And you know, of course, that was the only version I had of this movie for a very long time. Even though I liked sort of the fun, campy Godzilla movies that we've been watching, I do tend to prefer Godzilla with a bit more of an edge on him. So I do like this sort of force of nature Godzilla that we have in this movie. I think the Super X fighter plane that is in this movie, or really more of like a flying saucer, is a really cool enemy for Godzilla. And I think the fight scene is really good. I think this movie was ahead of its time in some of the way that it talks about dinosaurs relating to birds. Several years before Jurassic Park, I might add. I think this is just a really good monster movie, good Godzilla movie, and I'm glad that we're finally doing it, because like every time that we've done Godzilla, like I've wanted to do Godzilla 1985 or Return of Godzilla, whatever you prefer to call it. So like great movie that I have a lot of love for, in case you haven't guessed that by now.
Awesome. Okay. Julia, lay it on us. What do you think about this movie?
I think it's super depressing. I mean, I guess just the end is super depressing, but the end is so depressing that it kind of made the whole movie depressing for me. Like it colors the whole thing. Um,
Agreed.
yeah, there was some good stuff. We watched, I think we've already mentioned that there's the two versions. We watched both versions, the one with the subtitles, and then the one with Raymond Burr and everything is dubbed. And they're definitely different. I can't say which one I prefer. I probably prefer. Well, I can't say which one I prefer actually, but I think it's a good film. I think the effects are amazing, like especially when Godzilla's walking through the city and you actually have the Godzilla like running into actual buildings, which means that they made these giant models that were just really great. So a lot of that stuff, I was just like, how did they do this? I mean, obviously the models are the models, but a lot of the effects, I was like, how did they do this back then? Like they didn't have any computer graphics. I'm always amazed by practical effects and by how they swung things before we had computers. So, there's some really neat stuff. And, but yeah, God, the end just bummed me out so much.
Tony, where do you come out?
I mean, I can't say that I may or may not have teared up when I saw this in '85 in I guess it had to be Macomb, Mississippi, which I'm kind of surprised they got this film. It had a wide enough release that it released in this tiny place 45 minutes from where I lived, where that was the only theater, was 45 minutes away. So my parents took me. I have fond memories of this, and I think Drew touched on most of the things that I totally agree with. Having it be a direct sequel for years, the only version I knew was, Raymond Burr was in it. I didn't notice how disjointed some of that stuff is. And then I did see a completely unsubtitled version one time. My friend Hero brought back a VHS of 84.
Yeah.
And I was blown away that the Russians weren't the bad guys, and we had been fooled by the Cold War, that edit where the Russians become the bad guys and everything.
You'll have to explain the difference to me, because I can't remember now. I watched both versions.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But I think 84 is a better movie, pacing wise, character development wise. But 85, I noticed a lot of when they inserted military stuff, they did a lot to try to really tie it in.
Yeah.
And I've seen some things where they just kind of half-ass it. And the things that they're pacing wise and how they introduce Raymond Burr, how they introduce, well, there's a military thing, and then we're going to bring in Raymond Burr, and then we're going to comment on this. As ham-fisted as one of the younger military guys is, and his golly gee USA attitude, I think it's interesting how much work they actually put into it to really tie that in. And they didn't have to. It feels weird and disjointed when you see them both kind of side by side, but it is something that I didn't notice it when I was younger. I guess I would have been 11, I guess I would have been 12. So yeah, I think I really love the design of Godzilla. Super X is kind of a weird, goofy antagonist for Godzilla because it's not aerodynamic at all. The fuel it must take, I guess it's probably nuclear powered, to make that thing fly around would be crazy. But it's really interesting, and the idea they have of, well, Godzilla is this nuclear creature, so why don't we do how we would negate a nuclear reactor? All that kind of stuff. That's actually really cool, and there's a lot of cool science stuff. But I do kind of agree with Julia that it is, the ending especially is extremely melancholy. And having this new Godzilla come up just to be kind of ripped away, because we wouldn't get Biollante for quite some time afterwards, was, man, that was rough.
And we get, in fact, a Raymond Burr speech, and we'll talk about that as we go through. I think honestly, if you skip the English language version, you skip some silliness with Raymond Burr, but you also skip his really pretty excellent final monologue, which is
Yeah,
great.
and his performance is actually really good.
Yeah, no,
and
he's
a lot
a
of everybody's
respectable.
really trying. Like you know, some of it's kind of ham-fisted, like I said, but all of it, they really are trying to insert things that sound plausible in like an almost like a Metal Gear kind of way. Well, this satellite's doing this, and you know, they really are trying to tie it back in.
To Raymond Burr's credit, allegedly Roger Corman wanted to make the movie super jokey and re-edit it almost like What's Up Tiger Lily, and Raymond Burr was like, well, you
Not
can
with
either
me.
have you can, and you know, I think he, you know, like I think he brings a lot of gravitas to a lot of his scenes. You know, the way Raymond Burr does, and you know,
well, in fact, to the extent that they have any lines left from that concept, like whenever the younger officer makes a snarky comment, Raymond Burr's character shakes his head gravely, as if he is deeply disapproving.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the dynamic they've set up. You have like the grizzled soldier who knows better than to say almost anything other than the facts, and the younger guy who's gung ho, and Raymond Burr who's lived through it all and goes, "Listen, young buck,
Yeah.
you don't remember what happened.
You know what's really funny here
have that.
is that I want to get to some of that, but just let's remember when we get to discussing the appearance of Raymond Burr, how similar he is to a certain character in the New Millennium series, and it's not the Millennium series. Sorry, in the MonsterVerse series, and it's not who you would expect. So okay. This movie starts very much like the film that we watched about the giant mushroom people, about the killer mushroom people, which is it starts on a fishing vessel, you know, at sea with a boat adrift. It has a very cool sort of techno thrillerish sort of opening where, you know, we start on a boat, they're hearing strange noises, and then the next day, a reporter named Goro investigates the boat and finds only one survivor, which is a guy named Hiroshi. But he almost doesn't make it off the boat himself because he is attacked by a bunch of prehistoric irradiated worms.
Nuclear sea louse.
Sea louses, yes.
Yeah.
I don't even know if sea lice are a thing.
Yeah. They look crazy. They look horrible like that. Only they're not like that. Well, it's cool because it introduces this idea that there's all this other mutated fauna that kind of lives in and around Godzilla.
Yeah.
Because of this nuclear testing. So we don't know what else is out there. But yeah, the sea louse has drained everybody on the ships.
That sea louse terrified me when I was a kid.
It's creepy as hell.
Just to describe what this is like, he's like a big sort of, I mean, yeah, it's a real thing. It's a real thing called it's a fish worm with pincers and you know, it's basically, so it would grab onto you and just start sucking out your vital juices.
Yeah.
And
which that scene is longer in the 84 one.
Yeah.
And kind of more terrifying.
It's pretty scary. He finds several dead people who have been sucked dry. You know, their eyeballs literally just sort of desiccated into their sockets, and you know, he's turned everybody into Norman's mom. They're just all mummified. And there's one of these still running around. So the kid, Goro, he gets attacked by it, and then Hiroshi, who was on the ship, is still alive and is there to save Goro. And so they leave together. And yeah, when you think about it, this concept that lice could be sucking on Godzilla and grow large themselves means that Godzilla could be, you're right, birds that are near Godzilla that somehow get his Godzilla blood in them could, you know.
It's probably more likely more undersea stuff, but it sets up a really interesting, like there's a lot of cool concepts in this.
Yes. Yeah. Is that concept gonna come back? In other words, will there be other creatures that are made?
The only thing that I ever saw that did more than this is there was a manga adaptation of this. That had a scene with like a swarm of the sea louse attacking a fishing village, and I have never been able, like I found it once in like 1990, and I have never once been able to find that manga adaptation ever again. But I just remember that was like such a cool scene. And, it's a shame that there wasn't something like that in the movie. But I think the problem is if you had that in there, people would be expecting a whole movie like this. Although, in fairness, Biollante kind of dives into some of that because it gets into the idea that scientists are mucking around with Godzilla DNA.
Yeah, this film, that's a totally good point. This film, since it's just reopening the Godzilla universe, decides we're not really going to have another giant monster. We're going to have, well, unless you count these lice, which are little lice turn into something like 3 feet long, which is scary, but an actual full kaiju, we're not going to have that where, the entree is just with Godzilla. We still have some wackiness because we do have that sort of, that weird, the Super X, which is a hovercraft that is so powerful that it can hover, like 300 feet from the ground. That's the most sort of truly wacky stuff that they're going to have in this film. But anyway, right now, like I say, we're still in an arena that might be a Hollywood movie. There's this mysterious thing, there's a reporter, there's a scientist who was on the boat, and now they go back to Tokyo together. And immediately what happens is that the government of Japan shuts everything down. They take the kid, Hiroshi, the scientist who was on the boat, they take him, they put him away in a hospital to get better because he's had some shock, and they call the editor of the paper, and our friend Goro is clamped down. He's not going to be able to publish his article about this supposed return of Godzilla. And this is the first moment and this movie, again, like you guys said, is treating it extraordinarily seriously. That Godzilla was a thing that happened 30 years ago, and the government is very, very concerned that it might happen again, but they're definitely not interested in people talking about it.
Because it'll create a panic.
Right.
Well, I think the whole government cover-up part is great. The initial, we can't reveal this is Godzilla.
Right.
Well, and I
and the
love that
fact
it's
they
not just
hide,
the government, it's the journalists too. Like, they're like, well, I guess we have to not report any of this.
well, because the government cracks down on them.
Well, that reminds me a little bit of when we did Them, because you have you don't have, if this were a modern movie, you would have pushback to that idea. There would be the idea of the public, has the right to know under every and all circumstances. And this is a little bit more of an old-fashioned idea, a more conservative idea of what journalistic integrity is well, if the government wants to cover this up, we should help them keep a panic from happening until we're ready.
Although, you got to draw a line where the sister doesn't know that her brother's been rescued.
Right. Well,
so
let's get to that in 30 seconds, because I want to say, so first of all, that attitude is exactly in line with all of those 1950s sci-fi movies we saw coming from the United States, where there was very much an idea that the press had a dual responsibility to inform the public, but also to ensure the success of the American government. And so, if the army said, hey, there are giant grasshoppers in the sewers of Los Angeles, don't mention it to anybody, the press would go, okay. And that was the end of the conversation. Okay, but our guy Guro, he's part of a new generation, and he's like, that doesn't seem fair at all, because there is this young woman whose brother, who is the brother of this guy, and actually, by some amazing coincidence, she also works for Professor Hayashida, who is himself an expert on Godzilla and has been working on some way of dealing with Godzilla should he ever come back. That's a lot of coincidences. I don't think there's any explanation for it at all. I think it's just the case, that basically all these key people are very closely aligned. That's fine.
Oh, I think that is something I definitely think works better in the Japanese cut than the American cut, because they kind of expand on how all these people are interrelated and everything. And that overall, honestly, that scientist character is just handled better in the Japanese cut. Like in the American cut, it just seems like he's a lot. In fairness, there is a tradition of this in Godzilla as a film franchise, but he's just sort of like, this guy is now in charge of everything because he's Dr. Expert Man. And
Yes.
whereas this in the Japanese cut, they kind of get more into like his history with Godzilla and everything. And I think I don't know. I just think all that stuff works better. Sorry, Tony, I talked over you.
No, I'm in total agreement with you. The science plot and the government cover-up plot, because they kind of have to shorten that to add in military and Raymond Burr and such.
Yeah,
gets a lot more compressed, and so the way it plays out, and Goro going to different places and really trying to dig up, hey, I've got to expose this and what's going on, and figuring out why it's such a big deal to cover this up, as well as eventually going, hey, I can't keep this sister, like they're the only family they have. And the way that he introduced, the way he introduces it and how he kind of pushes that forward makes a lot more sense. It seems a little less selfish as well in the original, just because of the way they have to cut it up for the,
I want to ask you about the way the world is in this movie, and also want to segue into Raymond Burr here. But before we deal with Raymond Burr, just dealing with the Japanese version. So are we to understand that, let's see, okay, if you want to think 30 years ago, what's 30 years ago today? That would be like July of 30 years ago, like 89, right?
Which is when I graduated from high school.
Yeah, so if something happened 30 years ago, are we to understand that people basically haven't talked about it since, and so they've kind of forgotten that it happened? Is this like Tiananmen Square, where a whole
if you
generation...
have Facebook, you talk about 30 years ago graduation all the time. No kidding.
You talk about it all the time.
In a world of no social media.
No social media. No, when we were in, let's say we're in the what would have been 30 years ago in the 80s, would have been the 50s. Our parent, like my dad, talked a lot, and he still does, about his experiences coming up through the South in during the before the civil rights movement, where his like buddy got beat up or whatever. So I think people talk about that stuff all the time. I mean, I don't think it comes off.
I don't think it comes off like they don't talk about Godzilla. I think it comes off like this is something that happened. It only happened the one time.
Yeah.
So it's more like they talk about it like it was like a devastating hurricane or something.
Sure.
And it never comes across like people are surprised that Godzilla exists. In fact, it's more like when they bring up Godzilla, everybody's like, oh my god, Godzilla, gosh, that's awful.
I don't want to see that again. And there'll be plenty of people who were around to remember, like it's the Rolling Stones in their first farewell tour. Like, I can't believe it was 30 years ago that Mick Jagger said goodbye.
But here's the thing about that. Like, I think that also ties into Godzilla as a metaphor for the atomic bombings on Japan. Is that it starts to creep into history, and then it's also a generational memory. You have an older generation that was there and traumatized by it personally, and also. Or in the case of like the scientist, or in the American cut, Raymond Burr's character, who are now trying to like comprehend this thing.
Well, I have another example of that, and we've talked about it on this show a lot. How we've come across a lot of movies from the 70s that are like deeply traumatized. I shouldn't laugh. I apologize. They're deeply traumatized, sometimes exploitatively, sometimes working it out truly tastelessly by Manson, right? And because it's something everybody would know about. You could make a joke about Manson, you can make a comment on Manson, you can make whatever, but it's like yesterday and everybody knows about it. Today, I work with people and I'll talk about Manson. They don't know who that is. They don't know anything about it. It's as exotic to them as the Tuskegee Airmen and any other big concept from the past. Like before, it has no historical context at all. They don't know what it was, like why, how many, and it's just a deeply lost thing in history. So I think you could run the risk of Godzilla being like that. And actually, Drew, you actually just said something really wise, because in a way, if you're standing there in 1989, you're also probably thinking, if we're not careful, we run the risk of people wondering if Nagasaki happened. Like
Well,
yeah.
Part of it also is the fact that the nuclear bomb happened in this timeline. The nuclear bomb happened,
Yeah.
and then Godzilla happened, and
Yes.
so I think there is a kind of there. It's not explicit, but I think that there is a kind of thing where the government did suppress some things or doesn't mention it as much.
Yeah.
Because it feels like, well, if we could just forget it happened, like the oxygen destroyer took care of that.
Yeah.
So if we move on, we'll have moved on. And so it's whispered in hushed tones. It's not, a thing that gets talked about all the time on purpose.
There would be
And I think that's kind of what's happened here.
There would be an added layer of weirdness if something like Godzilla exists, because instead of it being like a bombing or a hurricane or some other disastrous thing, it's an animal that's enormous and has superpowers.
And don't forget that they used the oxygen destroyer on it, which was its own.
Yeah, that was supposed to kill him.
Right.
Although Raymond Burr asserts that in this that they kind of retcon that, because Raymond Burr asserts that they didn't find a corpse in 1956 or 1954, depending on which timeline you're in.
Right.
Maybe Godzilla got a few bones blasted off and then regenerated in the
well, there's
50
the
years.
idea. I think the main idea is just that it's another Gojirasaurus.
Well, that's super possible. So okay,
but also though,
talk about
in the other movie he survives the oxygen destroyer, just kills everybody else, doesn't kill him.
Yeah, but at the end of Godzilla, the 1954 movie, you see his bones settling to the bottom of the ocean.
But there's a weight to the fact that you're not supposed to use the oxygen destroyer. There's a reason why Serizawa kills himself.
Yeah.
So there's that too. So you have a government who it's in their best interest to just try to, as much as you can, wipe away as much memory of Godzilla as possible.
I am completely down with, like Godzilla is such a bizarre concept. I completely down to say, like, not that it really matters, but I'm completely down to say that somehow he regenerated and he got better. It just took him 30 years. Whatever.
Or it could be just a different, like you said, different Gojira monster.
Yeah, it doesn't. It ultimately doesn't matter.
My theory has always been that James Bond is not one person played by a bunch of different actors, but a bunch of different people playing, taking over the role of James Bond, which now is going to be proven to be true with now that they're going to have a black.
That girl's going to be 007, but her code name's not going to be James Bond.
But it's because she's
but
not
your
a
theory
guy.
is still pretty good.
I'm saying that I think that you don't just take 007. I think you take James Bond. Otherwise, what good is a spy going around saying I'm James Bond if he's a spy? Like that shouldn't be his actual name. It should be.
There was a show that did what you're talking about, because Michael Knight was the second Michael Knight,
right?
Believe it or not.
Anyway, so I think the same thing might be true here, where they just call him Godzilla, but like you said,
I know it's appalling that I would know that, but still. Because
my name is Zilla. God,
I believe that Devin was the original Michael Knight. But okay, so in this movie, though, I just want to talk about Raymond Burr's appearance. So right before the business with the sea lice, intermixed in investigating the ship, we reintroduce Raymond Burr as Mr. Martin, who that I want to call Steve Martin because it's too chuckly with the existence of a comedian named Steve Martin, but they call him Mr. Martin.
Which you got to be impressed with Steve Martin's career, given that he's still going strong, and it's been 30 years, and he was already famous enough back then for them to be like, this guy's too famous.
Right. So they open up with Raymond Burr at his retirement cottage with all of his cool stuff from being stationed overseas, and his little typewriter and everything, and his sad old eyes, and his grandson playing, and just like Clint Eastwood in Firefox, the army comes in and they're like, "You're needed in Washington, sir." It's fabulous.
Well, there's actually like a brief bit before that where they have him like waking up in the middle of the night, and it has like a close up of his like eyes.
Yes,
and I know
his sad eyes. Yeah,
I know it's just a tiny thing, but I love the idea. They wouldn't have called it that back then, but they're playing with the idea that effectively this guy has post-traumatic stress disorder from what he went through in the original Godzilla, which I think is great.
Absolutely.
And also that he's tied to it.
Yeah.
The fact that he feels something.
Yeah.
And they've also, in the 85 version, they've added some military stuff where they're like, hey, Russia, Godzilla destroys a Russian sub.
Yes.
And so because we're deep in the Cold War, our military goes, oh no, we have to, what's going on? Did we do this? No, I don't think we did this. Hey, let's go find out more about this. Because once in the Japanese cut, they decide to go, all right, we got to tell the world there's a Godzilla.
Right.
They have to get all the world leaders to talk about what to do about a Godzilla, even though it's really going to just affect Japan at the time.
Yeah.
But, they bring everybody in, which again, the way they've cut that leads to how it differentiates and how we saw the Russians in Godzilla through Godzilla lens versus how it actually happened.
Okay, let me tell you what I remember, and you tell me what's wrong. Okay, I remember that they're all gathered together, and there's the Japanese. There's the Japanese minister in the middle. There's the Russian minister, and then there's the American minister. The American minister is saying nuke them, and the Russians are saying the same thing. We agree with the Americans. Nuke the monster.
Right.
What's different in the American version? Because I can't remember there being a difference.
No, so the difference is later.
Oh.
So Japan says we will not use nuclear weapons. And you're, regardless of what's going on, I know this is a world thing, but we're Japan. Godzilla's our problem. That's a last-ditch thing. You're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so they basically shut that shit down.
Yeah.
And everybody's just like, what do you mean? You can't do that? We're all saying this. The way they even cut the entrance of the Russian embassy, the diplomat from Russia, is even they make him more menacing in the U.S. version.
That's true.
But they're still played by Americans, half of them.
Oh yeah, they're terrible actors. But the difference comes later, and if you don't mind me skipping ahead, because
you can skip ahead. Yeah.
So what the biggest difference is in the Japanese cut, they say, hey, Japan said they've hidden a nuclear launch. It's launched from a satellite, this nuclear missile, but they've hidden a launch boat in the harbor in Tokyo Harbor. Yeah. And so in the American version, once Godzilla's been downed by the Super X, and everybody's like, that worked. We didn't think it would work, but it did. That's great. The guy in there from Russia says, oh no, I have to, the only way to kill Godzilla is basically to push this button and launch the nuke. Yeah. In the original version, he said, hey, we're not going to do this. We're going to stand down. Everything starts going haywire. Godzilla, has hit the ship, and he's crawling towards it, and he gets electrocuted and dies before he can hit the button. But what a terrible... He's trying to be a hero in the Japanese version. His whole arc is, you know what? We're going to listen to Japan. I'm a Russian guy. It doesn't matter. I'm going to try to stop this because this will surely bring back Godzilla because we've seen him eat nuclear reactors. But in America, we're like, hell no, the Russians can't be good guys. We're at war. We're at Cold War. And so they cut it so that guy's not a hero anymore. He's an evil Russian.
He's trying to launch the missile. Yeah.
Like the Russians do.
Right. Right.
It's like, wow.
Like they do. Yeah.
That sucks for that actor. When you see it, I didn't know. Of course, propaganda of the time. Look what's happening in Russia, And I didn't think anything of it as a
that's
a kid.
Fascinating.
But that poor guy, years later you watch it and you're like, oh man, that guy's whole story arc is just totally different because Americans just couldn't have a Russian doing something good.
Yeah.
That's
so
weird.
So besides the nuclear plan, which we'll get back to in a minute, we've just said, the general plan is we're not going to nuke Godzilla, but the Russians we know are going to accidentally.
Well, before you get too far off from Raymond Burr,
yes,
you said that there was something that you wanted the link back to the recent Godzilla film.
Yeah, Raymond Burr's character is now Serizawa in the MonsterVerse. I mean, because everything that Serizawa says is not Serizawa style, it's Raymond Burr style. But because in this movie, Raymond Burr is all about, you're looking at it all wrong. You can't kill him with missiles. He's basically a giant poem, and there's just sort of like this weird mystical understanding of Godzilla that Raymond Burr brings into it, and he has all this gravity and everything, and that's the way Serizawa is reinvented for the MonsterVerse. Because Serizawa in the original was a smart, very, very focused, young, one-eyed scientist who was, just laser focused on doing his research and all else. He wasn't the sort of spiritual leader that we get, that Ken Watanabe plays in the MonsterVerse version. That's my take on it. Anyway.
Also, Ken Watanabe has two eyes.
Right. Absolutely.
I don't doubt for a second that they probably were looking at sort of, because like this, the stuff from the Raymond Burr character in this, but also, the other scientist character, the Japanese scientist too, like that sort of idea that, Godzilla is this force of nature that is immortal, but, and, maybe, above us, in a lot of ways, but also should be respected. That's something that we see carry through this entire series of Godzilla films. And it's something that continued on. Like it became like a permanent fixture of the Godzilla franchise, right up until the recent film. And I don't think that that's ever going to be something that's not in, it's now just part of the character's DNA.
It's a way to finesse the concept of that was in the Showa Godzillas, where Godzilla becomes a hero. And with this sort of newer concept, it's that Godzilla is sort of beyond our comprehension. And he's not evil because it's impossible to ascribe the idea of evil to something that is so big that it's just beyond it's beyond our moral measure to look at something that is like a storm and ascribe morals to it.
So the government has, what's funny is they've gone to great lengths to create a Super X just in case.
Yeah, tell us about the Super X.
They know that there's a thing. But before I get to that, throughout history, Japan has always been stricken by earthquakes, by volcanic activity, by tsunamis, etc. So the idea of a Godzilla is kind of, in some ways, just yet another, well, we have to deal with this as a country as well.
Mm-hmm.
Except this was created by external forces that mirror, terrible things that were done. So in that way, if you watch how the government, especially in the 84 version, handles it, they're very stoic about it, and when they do, they have to go, okay, this hurricane thing is coming, it's going to eat our nuclear reactors. We noticed that happening.
Mm-hmm.
But they've also created the Super X weapon, which is this weapons platform that they've decided, let's try to launch cadmium missiles, which basically absorb the radiation in a Godzilla.
Okay, all right.
And that's their plan is, well, we can't do much about it, but we can try to basically nullify this creature the best way we know how. Because cadmium is the thing you have in a nuclear reactor that
is cadmium also the secret ingredient of Cadbury eggs?
It certainly seems to leak like it.
But I mean,
no, I'm kidding.
That would be no Cadbury egg. I think you want to eat, but but you can try to feed Godzilla really tasty cadmium
Cadbury egg with cadmium
egg.
Actually, now
on Easter,
I want to see a Cadbury missile. That'd be awesome. You should and little bits of grippy cream to sort of gloop all over the place. And yes.
Well, you know what Godzilla really craves, if you go off of this movie, is Dr. Pepper.
That's right.
Oh, that is true.
That was so amazing.
The giant Dr. Pepper product placement. Yep.
Yes.
Well, there was also Dr. Pepper commercials at this point in time with Godzilla in them. One of my favorite.
There's the big the giant Dr. Pepper like soda machine behind the American dudes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, one of
But-
my favorite
Yeah.
stories about this movie is that when they were filming the American scenes, one of the producers came over to Raymond Burr with like an open can of Dr. Pepper, and they asked him if he could just drink a Dr. Pepper on screen, and apparently like he just shut the guy down with one of those glances that we see so often in this movie.
That's awesome. Can you do product placement? You don't call Raymond Burr to do product placement. Get the
That's
hell out of
very
here.
funny.
So
Those
yeah,
are the-
but cadmium is used in control rods in a nuclear reactor. It's kind of what helps. It absorbs the neutrons, and so it's part of controlling the reactor.
When
so they
when they're shooting Godzilla with those missiles, it's very interesting because
oh yeah,
yeah, okay, well, just to put the plan together really quickly without walking through the whole plot, just for a moment, the plan is going to be this: they're going to shoot Godzilla with cadmium missiles, hopefully to kill him or to weaken him or whatever. But beyond that, the scientist is working on a new technology that will make use of this primordial magnetic reservoir in Godzilla's brain that will respond to bird signals. So they're going to basically put a homing signal near a volcano, and they're going to hit Godzilla with it and hope that he walks towards the homing signal, and hopefully will fall into a volcano that they are going to make erupt through all kinds of manipulation of the volcano. That's
which
the
is
plan.
a pretty good two-pronged plan.
Yes,
Like
sure.
in as much as shooting masers at him never seems to work. And
What's the
certainly-
maser again? I know I've heard of that. I just can't remember what that
No,
is.
it's all the little like they have like a looks like a radar antenna dish.
Oh,
And they
right.
shoot electricity.
And it
it's-
does nothing.
Oh
Yes.
man, and it's terrifying when you know that there's people that here they line up tanks and all those weaponry and stuff, and he
Yeah.
just utterly destroys it. Planes, everything. Again, I always go, wow, I really hope the life insurance and compensation for families of Godzilla Defense Force,
Yes.
JASDF people. I hope that they have good life insurance and compensation.
And Godzilla is a
plans. Man.
badass too, because he's walking around. So first of all, they've re-engineered Godzilla physically to be bigger than he was before. So if he's regenerated or if he's different, whatever, he's like 100 feet taller than he was because all the buildings are taller. It's practically it's better to see him that way. Otherwise, you'd get what happened in the 1998 Godzilla, where they deliberately made the creature such that he would run around in among the buildings and be hard to find for helicopters. In this case, they're like, no, it's awesome to have Godzilla towering over buildings. So he's very, very big. He's got 4 toes. He's got big feet. Sometimes in close-up, we see a puppet Godzilla that is sort of an audio animatronic Godzilla that you can tell is a different Godzilla from the one that is the ship. But it's not that bad. And I think it's best when you're looking at the guy in the suit. It is the guy who is the so-called suitmation, the guy who is walking around in a Godzilla suit. This suit weighs nearly 250 pounds. I cannot, for the life of me, understand how you walk around.
I can't imagine it either, but it really is effective in making him feel like a giant monster because he walks so heavy. Whereas if he was just kind of wearing something that didn't bother him, he'd walk like a regular person.
The previous suit weighed 88 pounds.
That's one of the things I feel like they got very wrong about Godzilla in the 98 version is they made him really fast and agile, and I think the thing is that I prefer like a Godzilla that sort of has this sort of slow lumbering, but it's also imposingness. There's like a really great shot in this movie where Godzilla is walking by one of this building that has like all of this like really shiny glass on it, and you just see his reflection in it. And to me, that is like one of the best special effects moments in this entire series, and one of the reasons why I watch these movies.
I also really like the homeless guy who's decided to just take advantage. Like he's gonna eat at restaurants.
He's so funny,
and his whole he's the pressure release valve in these really tense situations, right?
Yes.
He's admonishing Godzilla like, I was here first, man. You can't
back off.
do this. He helps them later when they need help.
I will
calling it
say,
out.
I think his dubbing is funnier, like the dubbed dialogue, because I
Yeah,
watched
I agree.
not only the subtitles, but I watched the dubbed version
Yeah.
of the Japanese one, and I feel like him specifically, like the dialogue that they gave him in the American one, and maybe it's just a difference in sensibility,
Yeah.
but I
said the
really
same
think he's
thing when
funny.
he was on. I was like, oh my god, he's so much funnier dubbed than he was.
I kind of they did kind of just run with it. The actor in the dub really does run with it, and I think he does a really good job. It's because it still captures the flavor of what he's getting at.
Oh yes,
and I always liked that stuff and just how his reaction is, where he has this like false bravado.
Yes,
I can stand up to a monster. All of that stuff is really, really good.
He's amazing. It's an interesting character because it reminds me of that stuff that was in some of the versions of King Kong that we saw. How people are just living their lives while the world is falling apart. Especially in that Dino De Laurentiis King Kong, where
good. No, where what?
Well, they're talking amongst themselves, they're living their lives while King Kong is running around, and they treat it like a blackout, basically.
Well, and also I was thinking it's like, how Life is Beautiful, where you've got the guy who's decided to go ahead and try to give his child the, best life he can, even in this horrible situation. So it's like making the best of it. But in this case, I think this guy is probably too drunk to realize what's actually happening right now.
It's very possible. Yeah.
But you know what? I have to say, this is where the movie just got so dark and depressing for me, and I never recovered from it, actually, now thinking about it. It's that he just kills all those people on the train. Like it's one thing that he's killing people. It's one thing that he's killing people by walking through the city and just, destroying buildings. I mean, obviously people are going to die just from that. But he's not deliberately going, oh, hey, I see humans and now I will discard them. And in this, he really does think of people like ants, because, there are definitely people who will see a bunch of ants and just either step on them or pour, like the anthill on fire or whatever it is, or same thing with, roaches, termites, whatever. You just get rid of them and you're like, oh, these are a pest. I kind of feel like he thinks that's how humans are. Like, he's just like, oh, what is this? Oh, there's a bunch of little ants in this train. I'm just going to throw it over here. And all those people die. You know what I mean? Like, we don't see them die, but they must have died because he's throwing it from a very high height down to the ground. I don't know.
On the way in, though, they did shoot at him with tanks and such.
Yeah.
So
I'm not saying that
to him, he's just
but that's not the people who are shooting him. That's not him fighting back with this. Like,
do you differentiate when one ant bites you? Do you differentiate from all the other ants?
That's my point. I'm saying he treats us the way that we treat like annoying things that are annoying, because it's like the humans for the most part aren't killing him; they're just annoying him with their stupid lasers and what have you. And so he's just like, you're more of those same annoying creatures.
I really like that phrase.
The thing is about it, though, is the darkness of that stuff and the sort of gruesomeness of it is more in line with like the 54 Godzilla, where we see like the aftermath of his rampage and like Tokyo is on fire and we see crying children who can't find their parents.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like I kind of like I'm not saying I enjoy it per se, but I do like that stuff's in there.
That stuff exists, yeah.
But don't forget, he eats a train there's a train scene in the original in 54 Godzilla. It's super famous. Right. I mean, there's models built on it.
You chews on it.
They're really he chews it. He doesn't just shake it and throw it down. He actually just bites into it. You can get action there's statues of that. So it really, I mean, that's there in the same way that there's Kong movies that have homages to original Kong. That's the 84 version going, remember the train scene? Only now he's just gonna shake it around and throw it. Because it's slightly too big to eat, I think, in this case, because trains are different.
So at this point, they're shooting and they're doing missiles and stuff, and we cut back to Raymond Burr in the American version, and he says the line that gets used in the trailer, which is, something like, missiles and tanks, we did all this before, and And by the way that Burr is shot in these he only interacts with a couple of other actual live actors. There's like one other live actor, a general, who he'll be in the same room with. But most of the time, they're shot with him doing reaction shots, and they're, he might very well react with all of them at some point, because that seems to me he also is physically in the same shot with the young officer at one point. But a lot of it's just movie magic, where he was filmed like on one day, and everybody else shot around him, basically. So the best example I can think of for this is we watched Queen of Blood, and Basil Rathbone, I didn't recognize until I watched it this last time around, is really rarely in the same room with anybody else. In your memory, he's there with Dennis Hopper and whatever, but actually he was usually like just a reaction shot and filmed up against a wall and stuff like that, because he was there. He was a big asset, and he only wanted to be around for a short time, so they shot it all together. So yes, missiles. Godzilla gets knocked out. Very, very cool scene where Godzilla is literally resting inside the hollow of a building that he's knocked out, because Godzilla has been felled for the moment. And at that point, our heroes, the reporter and the girl, are trying to make their way down to the ground because they were not able to be evacuated from the lab. And they got the Godzilla experiment, the bird equipment, they got that out of the building, and the professor got away, but our lovers have to make it down on their own, and that's their adventure, sort of through this part of the thing. Is this building is falling apart because Godzilla is attacking the city, and they have to escape. And that's all pretty cool. That's some decent enough business for a movie that is about very big things. Here we're just seeing them try to survive, and they run into the drunk guy, which is cool.
So what's interesting. There's also a game called City Shrouded in Shadow.
Oh,
it's only come. I'm sad because it's only come out in Japan. There's a bunch of games called Disaster Report, where you basically deal with an earthquake or different things you have to survive. But there's a game that's just you surviving different kaiju. An Ultraman, and just a bunch of different, of course, Godzilla. Probably it's just been really hard to get all the licenses because there's a bunch of different kaiju.
Sure.
But I'm really sad that never came to the States, because you can watch walkthroughs. So
interesting. That sounds interesting.
It's got like King Ghidorah, Mothra, Batra, Pat Labor stuff, Evangelion, Gamera. It's all the Ultraman. Different Ultraman stuff, but
and you have to spend a lot of time trying to escape from buildings.
Yeah, you have to survive in the city while these things are battling and doing stuff.
Wow.
You can see playthroughs of it like on YouTube.
What was it called again?
I'm kind of City Shrouded in Shadow.
Awesome. All right.
But it feels all of the stuff that's in this movie, they definitely mined for that game. Because I think this one in particular has more stuff in the city with people trying to survive and run around, and that kind of that kind of action happens a lot more. Because they have to get to the helicopter. Also, one thing that I did think that sucks is in the American version, the girl's trying to hand the very important piece of tech, the bird call tech. In the American version, she's like, "Oh, it's so heavy," and in the Japanese version, she's really competent. Says, "No, you have to take this. This is important." Her whole character is such a better character.
Yeah.
And in the American version, we couldn't have a competent woman.
Isn't that strange?
It's so heavy. It's like, you don't even have to change that.
Sometimes the weird sort of knee-jerk misogyny sometimes really surprises me, because I'm not surprised at all that people do stuff accidentally, but it's or rather, I'm not surprised that there are jerks. But sometimes I'm surprised that people are like, what's the line I come up with here? And what you come up with is one that is unnecessarily hostile. To this woman.
Because the guy's being
because she's trying to say, this tech is more important than me. Take it.
Right. And that's legit. And it's a sacrifice, and it's a choice she has to make. And the guy's being whipped around in the wind. And so, to stabilize it. And in America, we just got, oh no, I can't possibly hold it, or whatever. Yeah. She said something about being too heavy, and that's
it's so heavy.
Which I'd forgotten about. It's so stupid. It doesn't. I don't know why they had to write it that way.
That was odd. So they make it down, and Godzilla wakes up because why does Godzilla wake up? Oh yeah, lightning.
The nuke.
No, the nuke.
But
That's
the
the whole
nuke
No,
point.
gets
the nuke is what. Yeah, the
but
lightning
the
is
nuke is
what
struck
wakes
by
them
Star
up.
Wars. Like we
Right.
intercept.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Americans strike it down in both versions, but the
Right.
difference is whether or not the Russians were good guys or bad guys. But the
Right.
fallout from it, because
Ah.
it's a near orbit impact,
I see.
it
that's what the
basically
lightning
sets
is?
the
Oh, okay.
fallout from the strike still hits Godzilla.
Okay.
So they thought they prevented it, but there's still enough radiation in the stratosphere.
All right, fair enough.
Basically
So, and luckily, this won't destroy Japan with nuclear fallout, because we know that basically Godzilla absorbs nuclear energy. And he starts, now is the time for the second plan, which is that he starts following what we're calling the bird call. All
Which
the way
is,
out.
again, you gotta give credit to them. Like, they were ahead of the curve as far as pop culture goes from America by like almost a decade.
right.
That's interesting, yeah, because he follows a flock of birds earlier, right?
Yeah.
That was a surprise.
Well, and they have a whole line of dialogue about how dinosaurs and birds are related.
Yeah.
And that was a relatively new idea at that time. And
Yeah, no, you're precisely right. I don't even know if I ever noticed it, Drew. That's what's crazy is you're right. This is about a little less than a decade before Jurassic Park, and Jurassic Park made a big deal about this. Birds are
To which I was
dinosaurs are
I
based
was
on
thinking,
birds.
oh yeah, like the Godzilla movie.
Yeah, I'm glad you thought of that, because I had completely just glossed right over it. Didn't think a thing about it, and it's only now that I've kind of understood how prescient that was. That's pretty cool. Yeah, so now they watch Godzilla lumber towards this bird call on this volcano, and our heroes, are back in the helicopter, so they watch as well. And Godzilla, it is tragic. Godzilla just he reaches the ledge. The ledge just collapses. The mountain just collapses under him, and Godzilla tumbles,
No,
head over heels.
They set off bombs to do that.
Are there bombs?
Yeah.
There's a whole
I'd forgot.
thing
Okay.
where they're planting bombs and making drilling.
but
They call
yesterday
out
when
the whole of the army.
But when I was right, I remember the setting them off, or setting them up, but I don't remember them going off, because when Godzilla.
In fact, there's those huge plumes of explosion material.
That's just weird, because I agree with you, but when I was rewatching the American version last night, I don't remember seeing all the explosions. All I remember is Godzilla reaches the shelf and it collapses under him. But
Yeah,
you're
I
right.
don't think that's as clear in the American version as it was in the other one. That what's happening there.
I don't know. I mean, I'll take your word for it again, but I always remember that really clearly because it's such a huge, crazy thing. It probably is bigger in the Japanese one, but I always remembered it. Like, oh man, that's awful.
I only mention it because I was looking for it. I'm sure it's there, but timing wise, I had completely downplayed the charges, because. Yeah.
All of this aside, what I find fascinating about the end of this movie, especially versus all the other American monster movies that I was consuming at the time, the contemporary stuff, which would have been like, Freddy and Jason, and, all that kind of thing. This movie makes Godzilla's death, as you guys put it, it's sad.
Yeah.
Like, you have the antagonist who has been an antagonistic force throughout this entire movie, and they as you said, Raymond Burr gives this stirring speech, and you have one of the members of the Japanese parliament like crying when it's the prime minister. I'm sorry, the prime minister of like Japan is crying as Godzilla, and that sort of like moral duality to me, that sort of shades of gray thing was like, it blew my little mind the first time I saw this movie.
So, Drew, I have a question, and I wonder, this is to everybody. Do you think we would feel the same kind of sympathy if there hadn't? I would be curious if somebody just saw this, hadn't seen any other Godzilla movies, hasn't seen him shake hands with Jet Jaguar, all of that. If it has the same impact, if you grew up watching him eventually become like a friend in some cases to Japan, I think it would, but I also, that definitely colored it for me.
It colors it,
growing up.
But let's say that even you didn't. I think if you, I know your question was for Drew, so let me do this in like 10
No,
seconds.
I think everybody, but
Watching this as a giant animal, I think nobody wants to see somebody unjustly punished, or so that's why it's always sad when Lenny gets shot in the head of Mice and Men, is that Lenny, in a very fundamental way, doesn't understand what he's doing when he kills things, and
Right.
so even though in the logic of the universe Lenny needs to be shot in the head, it's sad. That any person who was like jumping up and down and cheering, all the other characters would look at him and tell him to like chill and like go outside or something, because it is.
Well, it's like
totally,
putting down an animal that's bitten somebody, who's not necessarily
Yeah.
rabid, but just lost control or something, like a bear that happens into a
Yeah.
suburb, and then you're just like, oh man, that sucks.
And that's
Yeah.
something that all kids can understand. Like it's one of the first like complex things that kids get is the grave responsibility we have to control animals that we have had an influence on. Wolverine kills a rabid bear that's been driven, or not rabid, but a mad bear that's been driven mad by a poison arrow left by hunters who were irresponsible.
Or again, a wild animal wandering into a suburb that popped up where it used to just live. It's like, hey, I was here first, man.
Yeah. So
I mean, they do
amazing
chuck
stuff.
him into a volcano of all things as well, so that's
It's awful.
fairly
It's
traumatic
awful.
and awful.
On the other
It is.
hand, he's fine because he pops back up he waltzes out of that volcano like it's nothing in like 4 years. So
For Biollante. Yeah.
We don't know that in this movie, though.
Yeah.
That's
But I'm
true.
telling you, as sad as this ending of this movie,
Right.
Godzilla's fine.
Yes.
Right. But it was interesting. I mean, it blew me away as a kid, because you've got a Return of Godzilla. You're kind of expecting, you don't know what else they're going to make.
Yeah.
Right. Especially something that's been edited and adapted in the way this movie was. You're expecting a bunch of other Godzilla movies. And so you're kind of stoked. And then all of a sudden, Godzilla gets pushed in, and the music is just super somber.
Totally.
It's so effective. It's,
Yeah.
and the reactions, and there's even more of that in the Japanese one, but Drew's pointing out the reactions of everybody who just sees this as, we've lured him with these bird signals. This is a creature that, is smart, but also he's still a creature.
Yeah. That's right.
Fascinating.
Strangely innocent in a way, and that puts him in the tradition of the Frankenstein monster and stuff like that.
Right.
Well, King Kong, I think, more appropriately, because I mean,
Sure.
Kong is what inspired Godzilla to a degree. So,
boy, that's a good point. Yeah, absolutely.
I think the difference with Godzilla here is, of course, he's been increasingly as the previous version went along, he was they started giving him increasingly more and more human behavior. This one really dials that back a lot.
Right.
It's not quite as animalistic as Godzilla or Godzilla Raids Again, but it's more along those lines. And this interpretation is more as these new series of films progress, is more what we get. He regains some of his more human-like traits, but they never go full on with it the way the ones from the 60s and 70s did.
Yeah. So I have to say, in the end, and Raymond Burr gives his last talk, and then we go to the credits. It turns out that having Raymond Burr come back to read, a day's worth of dialogue was a really great thing, because I think we get his closing monologue, which is wonderful, and we'll put it up on the page so that people can hear him read all of that, because it'd be absurd for me or any of us to try to do justice to Raymond Burr. So cool. So that's the end. So is there? I'm trying to think if there's anything that we didn't touch on that we should mention before we go to final thoughts. But we've talked along the way about the metaphor of all of this. Why? I do have one question. Why does it take another 4 or so years for there to be another?
I think, I don't know if they had a plan. I know a couple people who could probably tell me in a heartbeat. But my impression was it was, that's how long it took to kind of, well, do we want to bring him back? I mean, it could have been final.
Yeah.
This could have been the last Godzilla movie with the way they ended it.
Right.
But they didn't.
The other thing is from what I understand, this was not a big enough, Toho was kind of hoping this would have been a bigger hit in the States because that's often where they made a lot of their extra money, and it was a bigger hit in Japan than it was in America. And I think that if you look at how they started distributing Godzilla in the Godzilla films in the 90s, where they were direct to video when they would come to the States, and it was more of a niche thing as opposed to something that would get a wide release. I think that that's something they really took to heart, because we didn't get Japanese Godzilla movies on the big screen again until after the 98 Godzilla was kind of a dud, the 98 American Godzilla.
Yeah, right. Well, and the funny thing is, it's after the 98 Godzilla in America that the Japanese try it yet again, starting yet another version. But this one kicks off a whole era. It'll be like 5 years, but after that, when they do come back 5 years later with Biollante, they will then stick around, like coming back like every year or two, but usually just a year. So they do 7 movies between 1984 and 1995, and they don't start again, by the way, until 1989. So really, they do almost all of those just between 1989 and 1995. So that's a quick bunch of that 7 movies in like what really amounts to about 6 years, 6 or 7 years.
Well, and those are some really fun, like I hope at some point we do some of those, because those are some really fun Godzilla movies. And I think in some ways my favorite interpretation of, maybe not some of the other characters in the Godzilla universe, but Godzilla himself, I feel like it's one of my favorite versions of Godzilla.
So I don't know it very well, but I've been given to understand, I know I've seen some of them here and there, but I've been given to understand that the ones in this 80s and mid-90s period, or really the early 90s period, ends in 95, that they have a more continuity from movie to movie. Is that true? Yeah. Is that right?
I would say so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they restarted into the 2000s, and those have somewhat of a continuity because they build off of each other. Like the 2 Mechagodzilla movies are directly after, they all flow. So,
you're talking about Mechagodzilla 2002, and he's in Tokyo SOS, which is 2003.
Right. And how Mothra flows into that as well. Right, so they redo all of that too. But each one has its own kind of continuity. But they started it back. Biollante starts back a certain amount of continuity because then Space Godzilla is Godzilla cells in space that get transformed into Space Godzilla, which is its own crazy business.
Well, and apparently Destroya is the end of that series.
And it also goes back all the way back to the Oxygen Destroyer.
Yeah, it becomes
part of this continuity that starts with this movie we just watched, and then there's like 5 more movies, and then 1 more that represents the end of this continuity. And
although this is the only one we get with this really sweet Godzilla design, because the Godzilla that they do in the other movies kind of looks almost like a werewolf Godzilla to me. He's got a more mammal looking face, which is fine because there's plenty of Godzillas throughout the history of the character that have mammal kind of featers. But
so the 1984 Godzilla design is
a one-off. It's a one-off, but it's
interesting.
I really like this, which isn't a knock on the rest of the design for the rest of the series. That's also a really cool design that is actually, I think, probably for most people the best Godzilla design. Like, I think if you were to ask a lot of fans, they would say that that 90s Godzilla with the sort of, kind of canine.
Well, and it had, what I remember is it has a big sweeping neck.
Yeah.
That an almost shark-like neck.
Well, they bring the ears back. He's got ears kind of like a cat, and he's got very mammally looking nose, and he's got 2 rows of teeth, and he's cool looking. I'm not saying that design isn't cool looking. Just think I just really like the sort of super pissed off Godzilla in this movie.
This is my favorite design as well. Although I am wondering at what point Julia's sitting there going, nerd.
Yes.
Nerds.
I'm not. I never think that, Tony. Not ever.
Lies.
Good cover.
Wow, so it is a significant difference. I'm looking on the Godzilla wiki. There's a Wikizilla. Not making this up. It's wikizilla.org.
He you know, but being in a volcano kind of changes your appearance a little bit.
Sure. Well, you know,
think.
at least that's an excuse that works. I mean, you know, Captain America changes his outfit every movie and there's no explanation whatsoever. So, you know, whatever. Batman never has two outfits alike. Okay, let's get our final thoughts on the Return of Godzilla and then figure out what people want to tell us to watch. It was Drew, Julia, Tony, and then I'll go. So, Drew, I know this is a favorite film of yours. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on, or have you enjoyed this conversation about Return of Godzilla?
Man, I could have probably talked about this for like another hour. Like I really like this movie. I think it's got a really interesting production history, which we barely touched upon, but I don't think any of us have that. That's an endurance test. I think if we get into all of that, I really love this movie. Like I know some of that might be nostalgia goggles. I don't care.
Mhm.
You know, like it's a movie. I probably rewatch this movie more than any other Godzilla movies because I just have like a very deep emotional attachment to it, because it's really, you know, prior to this, the only Godzilla that I had seen was the objectively terrible Hanna-Barbera series. So this is really what kicked off my Godzilla fandom, because it's Godzilla who is powerful and terrifying and awesome and tragic and all the things you want Godzilla to be. And I just think this is a wonderful film. And you know, it's scary, but it's not so scary. You know, I will point out, you know, I saw this as a very little kid, and it's a scary movie, but it's not so scary that you can't show it to a kid. So if you're looking for something to introduce kids to, you know, monsters and science fiction and, you know, horror films, I think this is a good kind of starter movie. You know, and who knows, it might kick off a level of obsession that you're getting tattoos when you're middle-aged.
Who would
Wonderful.
do that?
Right. Julia, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I don't think we talked as much as I would have liked about about how like I say, how the effects that I liked so much were done. I'm really, that's the one thing aside from the fact that it was super depressing.
Well, there's
that
no
I really took
clipboard.
away
If
from
there's
this.
something you'd like to discuss right now,
No. But
can
I'm
throw it
thinking
out.
what I'm
Yeah.
just, that's what my point is, that I'm saying. I think we covered a lot of the things I was thinking, except for that we didn't really talk about that. And so to me, we talked about the suit being so heavy. When he's walking through the city and he's like leaning on the building because he's getting, either because he's moving around and knocking into things, or because he gets, you know, he's being shot at or whatever. He's having his cadmium berry eggs. And you know, he like hits the buildings. There's some of the times it doesn't look that real, like it's a real building, but some of the times it really does. Like it looks like there's all this glass and all this metal coming. I just think those are really neat effects, and the little vehicles and the little people that are like superimposed, or I guess the vehicles might be models, but the people are just superimposed onto these scenes, and it's just remarkable. I think those are really great effects. So I just wanted to restate that. Other than that, yeah, I think we hit everything that I wanted to talk about. And yes, I'm still super depressed about this film.
Tony, what are your thoughts?
I'm with Drew. This was, you know, I even think that maybe somebody I know taped it off a cable and gave it to us. So before I was able to buy a tape of it, I had watched it, I don't even know how many times. The dub, of course. And it wasn't until I was in college in the mid 90s when I got to finally see the unedited one. Just no subtitles, no nothing. You know, the only parts were when they're, you know, the consulate talking and trying to figure out what to do about a Godzilla and whether or not to nuke it. But it's still one of my favorites. It's definitely one of my favorite designs. I really enjoy how it's a direct sequel to 54 Godzilla and has that kind of weight, even if there's some kind of comic relief parts that you know, definitely lighten the air a bit here and there. It's really I could watch it an infinite number of times.
Wow.
It's definitely one of my all-time favorites. I just really, really enjoy the movie. And it is super tragic. Like, Julia's not wrong. I definitely was pretty shooken up at the end. I mean, it's so tragic. Like Godzilla falling into the volcano and the way they shoot it and how the soundtrack is. It's got a great soundtrack too. I really enjoyed the Super X is kind of goofy in some ways, and there's a Super X 2 that eventually comes out. But but Godzilla does get good revenge because he knocks a whole building on the Super X when he's really PO'd.
You know what I think the deal is with the Super X is I think it was their way of having a monster battle without having another monster in the movie.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's a cool way because it's also like very scientific. It also gives them finally. I mean, if the nuclear weapon hadn't been launched, they probably would have been able to just haul Godzilla off and shove him into the volcano.
Yes.
Or taking care of him some way. But it's actually really effective, and so that science of, you know what, we've had a long time to think about this. We think this is the best course of action, and Japan takes care of it themselves, even though the whole rest of the world is like, hey, let us take care of Godzilla for you.
Yeah.
Japan really is able to put forth a thing where they go, no, we're an autonomous nation. We built this thing. We're the ones who dealt with the Godzilla. You guys didn't deal with the Godzilla. That didn't affect you. In fact, you caused it. So why don't you let us do this? And all of that stuff has even more agency in the 84 version as well. So yeah, I really just enjoy this movie a lot.
That's a really, really good point. Yeah, the Super X2 shows up at the end of this series in Biolante. So okay, the only other thing that I would mention is that I think the romantic couple are great. I really enjoyed them. The young couples who are on the run. It's Naoko and Goro who are just trying to make their way to the ground, and that's cool. I thought they're handed a fairly this is a fairly silly setup, but they treat it like a disaster film, and that works great. And that was cool. Everything you guys said is exactly right. This is a very enjoyable movie, and somehow I think avoids a lot of the pitfalls of a lot of the other ones where a lot of the complaints we had about Godzilla movies is that the movie's 90 minutes long and it's 60 minutes of people running around in cars and then 30 minutes of Godzilla. And this somehow avoids a lot of that. It's still just a lot of humans having arguments, but it's not dull. At least I didn't find it dull. So that was pretty cool. And that brings us to the end of Godzilla 1984. I am dying to know what you guys. We haven't been together for a couple of weeks, so I'd love to have your endorsements. If you tell me, like, what have you been watching, reading? What do you want to talk about? Same order: Drew, Julia, Tony. Then I'll go. Drew, what do you have to endorse for us?
Well, I have. First of all, I need to plug that there is a new Halloween Man collection out on Comixology. It's volume 3 of the Comixology series for those of you who read it in the collected volumes, and respect to that. It's American Nightmare and Other Stories. It's a storyline where Halloween Man takes on a satanic cult who is interfering with our elections. So it might feel timely to some of you. But it's got some kind of very Steve Ditko-esque artwork by Mr. John Souter. Shout out to John, because I also know he listens to the podcast. I am really proud of this story, and I just actually reread it the other day, and I guess it's on some level it's narcissistic to be entertained by your own work, but I really just get a kick out of this one, so I hope other people feel the same way as well. The other thing that I've been getting into, there is a PBS produced YouTube series called Monstrum, which is it's hosted by a doctor of folklore named Dr. Emily Zarkum, and each episode is about 5 to 7 minutes long, and they tackle a different monster from folklore, and discuss it at length, and what it means culturally and everything. And it's just a fun little series, especially if you're interested in folklore and monsters. And some of the stuff, it's going to be stuff that you already know, but the graphics and the way it's put together is really interesting. And actually, one of the episodes that they have is on both Godzilla and Mothra, so it ties into what we've been talking about all these weeks. So enjoyable, and especially I think it would be good for kids who are having a budgeting interest in folklore and mythology and monsters and things like that. And PBS is, I feel like, an important thing, and so I feel good plugging this.
That's really cool. All right, well, thank you. That's awesome, and congratulations on the new collection. Julia, what do you have to endorse?
I want to endorse the new season of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, because I just love that show on Netflix. It's so fun to watch. Jerry Seinfeld drive around in awesome vehicles, drink coffee in cafes, and they have amazing photography of the coffee with hilarious people, and they have really interesting conversations. I gotta say that this season Jerry seems a lot grumpier and more bitter than he has in the other seasons. In other seasons, I've actually been surprised that he's been super nice and deep. And this season, it's like he's really grouchy. So I don't know what's going on with him. But anyway, it's very entertaining, and I just, oh gosh, there's some great people that he's got. I'm trying to think now who the first ones were. But anyway, he's got Matthew Broderick and Jamie Foxx, and oh gosh, I can't remember who the first one was now, but it was somebody huge. But anyway, check that out. We also went and saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't know if Jason was planning to talk about that, but I was not as into it as he was, so I'm going to let him talk about it, because I felt
I don't know if I'll talk about it at all, because I don't want to it almost deserves an episode. I mean, but go ahead, continue. Yeah.
But anyway, I was going to say that it is very classic Tarantino. I think part of what turns me off about it is that there is so much violence. And but I will tell you what, if you are a person who enjoys looking at very pretty men, this is the film for you. That is what I will say about that.
There we go.
I'm hearing a lot of mixed things about the movie, and even though I do like Quentin Tarantino's movies, I just never need to see another thing about Charles Manson ever again. So I may sit this one out.
I have to mention that it was advertised originally as being Tarantino's Manson movie, but actually it's hardly, basically the Manson stuff is hardly in it at all. It's more like they random. Yeah,
it's like a subplot.
In the same sense that Butch, the attack inside the pawn shop. If you went through your life and that was like the biggest crime that had been committed in the century, and you went Pulp Fiction and you're like, hey, I hear that attack is in this, but that was it. Bruce Willis kills some people with a sword, and that's what it's like. It's
not how it really happened in real life. So it's
that's a spoiler for sure.
No, but it's just it's Quentin Tarantino's reimagining of things. So anyway, so it's a good.
But you know what? I'm not going to afford. But by no means. But I'm just saying this is not Helter Skelter or even The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which just came out very recently. This is really a movie about a stuntman.
Related to that, I wonder. I have to rewatch the film, the video of it. But a long time ago, I think I mentioned a couple times. A long time ago, I saw a AFS, Austin Film Society, did a thing where they got a bunch of stuntmen together. They gave them steak and whiskey and just had them tell stories. So they had great stories of Bruce Lee on the set of the Batman. Bruce Lee as Kato. They had a good story about they were filming close to Spawn Ranch, and one of the guys, way before Manson was Manson writ large or infamous, actually threw him off the set because they had him in as a mechanic. Like, hey, this guy can come in and fix your cars, and the guy actually one of the stuntmen physically threw him because he was creeping out on all the women on the set, and they warned him, and then he picked him up, chucked him, and funny. But there's a video of all this that somebody made of the whole thing. So between that and the Bruce Lee parts of that which like I said, I have to rewatch and see if those are included in the video they recorded. But if they recorded the whole thing, it'll be in there. I should post it on our
I will say
Facebook page.
that I love how the Manson family is portrayed in this film. They're so weird. I mean, I know that's how they were too, but they're so weird and creepy and just. I thought it was really interesting. And again, all the stuff like it's a fictional character interacting with them in a context that never existed. So I think none of the things about the Manson family, except for possibly the names and a few of the possibly some of the events, but none of the things are true to true to life. But they're really, and maybe they are. I don't know. There were some things that I was like, oh, was that real? And they're like, oh yeah, that was real. But yes, it's that part's entertaining. I feel like it goes on too long. I personally, Jason didn't agree with me on that, but anyway,
I could have had another 6 hours of it. Honestly,
Yeah.
I wanted this to be.
I'm gonna remember this next time you're complaining about the length of a Marvel movie.
I truly was like, why can't this just be like 7 hours long? I just really want to run around in this world.
Well, he wants a
It's like,
miniseries about it, which I think is
do
kind of
whatever the
insane.
hell. I really wanted Tarantino to just do whatever the hell you want. Just like have these characters just wander around Sunset Strip some more. I don't care. It's fine. I was just really enjoying the whole thing. And at times it really does seem like Tarantino himself is like, something, I really just want to recreate digitally and through whatever 1969 Hollywood and have Brad Pitt wander through it and talk to people. Yeah. So, all right. Well, awesome. Thank you, Joy.
Oh, and Brad Pitt has his shirt off for a good chunk of it.
Yes,
so that's fun.
absolutely. Yeah.
That's enjoyable. And there's if you like what's her name? Oh my God, help me out. It's
Margot Robbie.
Margot Robbie. If you like, there's a lot of her, and not as much, but there's a lot of her as well. So there's something in it for everybody.
She is so sweet. Her portrayal of Sharon Tate is as this wide-eyed, just sort of person who's just amazed at how awesome it is to like be in movies. Very cool character. So yeah. Anyway, cool stuff. Tony, what about you? What do you want to recommend?
So I wish it was more widely available, and I also really wish it wasn't canceled. But I've been enjoying the Swamp Thing series on the DC Universe. I really dig it, and it's a real shame that they couldn't continue with it. Although it is weird that they don't allow you to binge watch it. I'm up to the last one, and they're like, "Hey, wait a week," which is odd to me, but that's just the way they release stuff on the DC Universe app. So next week I'll finish it, and then it's gone, and that's a shame because the suit looks really good, and I think they're tying a bunch of stuff in.
What do you mean it's gone? You mean they put it up and then they take it down? Or...
No, it's they canceled it for some various reasons. Part of it was funding. Supposedly it got complicated. Some people said it was funding, and then some other stuff came out, and but basically as they were releasing it, they said, hey, in fact, it super sucks because a friend of mine was like, why are you watching that? They canceled it.
Right.
Which doesn't help people build like that grassroots. Because of the way we get things now, it doesn't seem like there's a grassroots, hey, save Swamp Thing kind of thing going on. It's just, well, if they canceled it, why the hell should I care? It seems to be the universal, because it happened right as they were releasing it. So it wasn't like they got, because of how,
or as the headline puts it,
yeah.
Why was this show canceled after one episode? Like, yeah.
Right.
Gosh.
And so instead of this thing where you have several episodes coming out and then people get angry because they have invested in it. It's basically as they release one episode, it just felt like they gave up. So a bunch of people didn't even start it because why would you? Which is a shame because I think it's pretty cool actually so far. I'm interested to see what the final episode is like. And in Godzilla news, it's been kind of rumored it was going to happen. The announcement was going to happen. And I kind of was thinking it was going to happen when I saw the Godzilla films on the Criterion channel. But there is Criterion's 1000th release is a 15-film Showa Godzilla set with an amazing art book done by a bunch of people. Becky Cloonan being one of them. I've kind of been familiar with her work since we were doing stuff for Tokyo Pop, and I wish her book, East Coast Rising, would have continued because it was really good. She's amazing. She's done tons of stuff. She's a cool person. a metalhead, but she's but one of just a ton of cool artists doing stuff for this set. So it's on Blu-ray, remastered, the whole 9 yards. I'll need to post the link, but it's got a cool art book, 15 movies. I forgot how many discs. I am super stoked because you can pre-order it now. It comes on October 29th, I believe. So of course, just like anything, people are griping. Like I seen a 1-star review on Amazon. It's not even out. It's pre-ordered. Doesn't include Gargantuas. I'm gonna give it 1 star. Like that's it doesn't even count. How is that useful? Or this is trash because I don't like the artwork or something.
People are so odd, man. I mean, I'm serious.
Nobody's even seen this thing. And if you watch the movies on the Criterion channel, they are beautiful. I'm pretty sure they're going to use those prints. It's got Godzilla versus King Kong. It's got the original version, which people were like, oh, it doesn't have it. It's going to be the dub, blah, blah, blah. And they came out and said, no, it's going to have both. I don't know, man. The internet's... People just like to gripe about just the
post a link about the book.
Yeah. I'll post the pre-order. I'll post it from Criterion. There's a couple places I've seen that have it cheaper. I pre-ordered it from Criterion because I knew that I'm for sure going to get it. Yep. I mean, I couldn't. Luckily, I had the cash. There would have been a time when I didn't.
Sure.
But if you do have the money, I think it retails for like $220 something. Criterion has it for $179. I've seen it for as low as like $150. Strangely enough, Amazon doesn't have a discount on it. But if you get it pre-ordered through legit Criterion, I'm guessing that they'll fulfill.
And it's how many movies again is it?
15.
I mean,
it's $12 a movie, and people are like, "Oh, that's like if you buy it pre-ordered directly from Criterion, it's $12 a movie. You rarely can get that on the Blu-rays currently. The only thing I'm mad at is I bought a bunch of these. Like I bought Gigan, I bought Ibarra.
Sure.
I just bought a bunch of Blu-rays from Kraken Releasing, which that may be, Drew, why you had problems getting the 84 or whichever one you didn't have.
It was Gigan was the
Gigan, yeah. I bet that it went out of print, and then they were about to announce that, and then things went off the rails.
That makes sense.
So there you go. I can't wait. It's going to be a long wait till October. I guess it'll be early November before I get it, but I will be rewatching a lot of Blu-ray, nice high def, cool Godzilla.
Yeah, for real. So my recommendation, first, a very quick one. The Very British Horror just did an episode on Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and I love Dracula, Prince of Darkness, so it's really cool hearing those guys discuss that show. It's just neat to hear them just sort of walk their way through the film. I don't know, that was enjoyable. So my recommendation is, besides Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I won't recommend or not recommend that. It's a big movie. It doesn't need my help right now. But I will say you should go and see The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which is on, well, you can get it on VOD now. And it just came out in the past year. And in that one, Hilary Duff plays Sharon Tate. And it shows the Manson guys almost not at all. It instead is really about her and Abigail Folger and Jay Sebring and Roman and the other guys wandering around the Polanski compound in that last month or so. And it's a very interesting film because it's definitely not a very expensive one, but it's got Hilary Duff. She does a wonderful job as Sharon Tate, and it kind of explores just this notion that we really wish that the things that didn't happen, and how are some other ways that it could happen. It's in a way it gets experimental towards the end, and so it's kind of a cool lower budget companion to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So there we go. I also spent today avoiding my responsibilities and rewatching the entire Wet Hot American Summer 2017 season, and it's just one of the greatest things that ever existed. So that's all I have to say about that. So thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed watching the Return of Godzilla. I know we're back next week with yet more Godzilla. I just can't remember which one it is.
It was Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla.
Which one? 2002?
No.
OG. Original Potbelly. Awesome.
All right.
Mecha
Outstanding.
Showa era Mecha Godzilla.
Yeah, Showa era Mecha Godzilla next week. Same bad
the
time.
O
Same
and
bad
OG
channel.
stands for Godzilla.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Dad bod Mecha Godzilla.
Fabulous. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Be excellent to one another. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Right.
Good night.